Maike, our next speaker, is also working on the visualization process, which is super important. Like, how do we look at this? And so it's not just a spreadsheet. So she's been working with NatCap and how we do the valuation.
Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. Last presentation for the day, eh? Hopefully this last presentation that I'm about to give will also, I think it's really fascinating how many different tools we've already seen and how different tools are appropriate in different areas at different scales for different contexts and different services. So hopefully this will bring it all a little bit together. And my little card this morning was build from the bottom up, and I feel like a lot of what I'm going to tell you now is kind of going a little bit back to the basics. So like Anna said, I'm Maike Hamann. I'm with the Natural Capital Project, or NatCap. I'm based at the University of Minnesota with the Institute on the Environment. And I'll just give you a brief overview of what NatCap does and some of the tools that we've been developing over the last 10 years of being in the ecosystem services field. So going back to basics, going back right to the beginning, why does NatCap do what NatCap does? Basically, our goal is to harmonize conservation and development goals for a more sustainable future. And how do we want to do that? We want to do that by mainstreaming the values of nature into policy and practice and to impact decision making. So we want to actually change decisions. We want to make decisions have more favorable outcomes, not just for nature, but also for people, importantly. And when I talk about values of nature, I am not just talking about monetary or economic values at all. NatCap is not just about putting a dollar value on nature at all. We consider values to be a much more holistic, broader concept than that, but I'll get back to that a little bit later. NatCap is also not some kind of institution or institute or anything like that. We're more a network of researchers that are based at different institutes across the world. We do have some core institutional partners that form sort of the backbone of NatCap, and where most of our researchers are based at, which Stanford and the University of Minnesota are two of the academic institutions. We have the Nature Conservancy and WWF, and now a very new partner that just joined us is the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And so we work all over the world, and our theory of change goes like this. So given that our goal is to make decisions with better outcomes for people and nature, we want to do this by getting information about natural capital into these decision-making processes. And how do we do that? Well, we need more information about natural capital and ecosystem services. So NatCap is about advancing science of ecosystem services, but we don't just want to obviously keep all that knowledge to ourselves. We want to be able to share it and create user-friendly approaches and tools that people can use in different contexts all over the world. And we want to build and tell success stories so we can show that this approach is actually working. And I'm going to, for the rest of the presentation, now focus on a little bit about our tools, specifically our sort of flagship tool, which is Invest. There's a lot of other tools that are constantly being created within the NatCap initiative. You can come talk to me about some of those later if you want to. There's probably a couple of icons missing from that slide. But a lot of the tools that are there actually build on Invest, so I'm going to talk about maybe Invest. And Invest is the integrated valuation of environmental services and trade-offs tool, and it itself is not a tool or a thing, it's more of a suite of models. It's in itself is more of a toolbox as well. So what Invest does is a typical Invest model, you know, if you want to use it, you have this landscape that you're interested in. That might look something like this, some kind of multifunctional landscape, and you're interested in the ecosystem services that it's providing. So you need a bit of information about this landscape to input into your Invest model. So you need, you know, and I'll come back to what some of that information might need to be to run Invest. But what Invest then does is it takes this input information, and it's a process. Invest models are process-based models. So at the heart of Invest lie all these models that have been coded based on fundamental ecological information, like years and years of basic science that tries to understand how ecosystems work and how ecological functions do what they do, is what underlies these models. And out comes, you know, something like that looks a little bit like this. For example, an ecosystem services map, in this case it's carbon storage, that tells you where a service is provided in the landscape and how much of it is being provided. And that's, you know, a simplification, but to come back to kind of saying that in a little bit more abstract form, Invest is based on ecological functions. that it then turns into a service map or a service assessment or a service quantification. It tells you where your service is being supplied and how much of it is being supplied. If you then want to add a value to that, if you want to say something about the value of that service, that is an additional step that users need to think about and take and put a little bit more work into, because, you know, not all services are created equal, not all places are the same. You need to understand a little bit more about your context, about your landscape, to be able to say something about the service and the social preferences that would then give the service a value. So you can use Invest to do some of that work, but there is an additional step that you have to take as the user to say something about value, whether that be like an economic value or some other kind of value quantification. So some of the common inputs you would use to run Invest are things like land cover, digital elevation models. Maybe you need a soil map for certain services, maybe you need a road map for certain services. You need, if you want to do something with carbon, or mapping carbon stocks, you need to know what kind of vegetation stores how much carbon in your particular area. So there is a bit of, there is need for input data that you need to compile. And then you get outputs that can look different depending on what kind of service you're modeling and assessing. You can get vulnerability maps, you can get just simple sort of abundance or total amount maps of like cubic meters of water provided by this certain unit of your landscape. Or if you have that information about value and pricing, you can have a map of sort of dollar values across your landscape. So it depends on how far you want to take it. And again, we have a lot of models up on the website. This is just a selection. There's more than 20 models that are available for free download on the Invest website or the naturalcapital.org. It's actually naturalcapitalproject.org, sorry, but it's at the end. You can find all that information. And it's not just the models for download, there are extensive user guides. We have a really large community of users. There's a great user forum. Our software engineers make sure that they regularly answer questions on that forum. So we do trainings also, like often during the year all over the show. So you really get a lot of support when you use Invest. However, at this point, I should point out that Invest was not developed for the urban context. Invest was developed for rural coastal areas. And if you just compare those two landscapes, it becomes pretty clear, just thinking about an urban environment, how much more complicated and complex things get very quickly, especially when you're talking about ecosystem services producing, ecological systems producing ecosystem services. The urban context kind of messes everything up just because, yeah, it's true, because even just thinking about the amount of, infrastructure, like great infrastructure that is kind of influencing how your ecosystems function, and then you have all these different people there, and like lots of them, and they all like think about ecosystem services differently. They're all different beneficiaries, and there might be conflicting views and preferences, and so it's hard. And so what we've done, obviously it's a big frontier in ecosystem service science. So NatCap's now got a Livable Cities program that aims to ask a couple of key questions about, when does nature provide services in cities, who benefits from these services and who doesn't, who's negatively impacted. Can we show maps to use this information in practice, again coming back to our goal of influencing decisions with good, salient information. And so just to kind of, towards the end now, to mention that some of the current Invest models can actually be applied in an urban context because of the way they've been set up. These are the ones in green, so you can already use those in an urban system. The ones in orange, we're currently actively working on developing specific urban Invest models. So we're going to have a separate urban Invest suite coming soon. The ones in blue are a little bit more on the back burner, not because they're not important, but just because we had to prioritize somehow. So they're on our radar, they're just not quite as far along as the ones in orange. So I'm hoping, hoping not to say anything wrong, but within the next year or so, we're hoping to have at least the ones in orange, as well as the ones in green that are already up and running and available on our website. And so just to come back to sort of answering one of Janine's questions, like what would happen if everyone did this? If everyone had information about the value of nature in their city? I think that, seeing nature in cities as not just something pretty or nice to have, but as something that is really providing a value that is functional and that provides a feasible alternative and a real alternative to grey infrastructure is really, really useful and really valuable. And I hope that along with just knowing this, we also start to bring into these assessments and analyses more and more an understanding of the implications of the distribution of nature in cities, of who's benefiting and who's not benefiting. And that's it. Thanks.
So I don't know about you, but as I was hearing that tool, I was like, wouldn't it be cool then if the next stage would be to put into those models all of the design interventions and to see how the design interventions in an urban environment can get that gray, those gray zones that we saw on a bunch of those maps, to look more like the green zones, right? There's a real visualization of we need the data from the research stage. One of the outcomes could be, how do we build those models that can go, the tool exists, we just got to input new models to generate how well are we performing? How well are our cities being generous? Excellent.